Now, one of the pluses, I believe, for our ebook online or any textbook is when they give you a review of the full chapter. So I thought we'd look to see what's available in your online textbook. And this is, of course, for every chapter. Fill in the blanks with one of the words or phrases listed below. So let's give it a go. The symbols not equal to, less than, greater than are called, this is number one right here, inequality symbols. A mathematical statement that two expressions are equal, this is an equation. The what of a number is the distance between that number and 0 on the number line. Absolute value. A symbol used to represent a number is called a variable. Two numbers that are the same distance from 0 but lie on opposite sides of 0 are called, let's see here, opposites, I believe. Or additive inverse. I don't see that word there. All right, number 6. The number in a fraction above the fraction bar is called the numerator. 7. What of an equation is a value for which the variable that makes the equation a true statement? Well, when we solve an equation, we get a solution. Two numbers whose product is 1 are called a reciprocal. In 2 to the third, the 2 is called the base. So that's the first part of 9. And the 3 is called the exponent. So there's the other part of 9. 10. The number in a fraction below the fraction bar, that's the denominator, which is going to be right there. Parentheses and brackets are examples of grouping symbols. And a what is a collection of objects? Well, one of our first words here. A set. Do you remember all the different sets we talked about? That's coming up in the review. So, highlights of Chapter 1, continuing. Again, I'm not going to go through every item, but I want you to see what's available. There's the set. The members are called elements, and this is roster notation. Here's the set of natural numbers with its ellipsis, whole numbers, integers are whole numbers and their opposites. Rational numbers include all of these, but fractions as well, whose decimal form terminates or repeats. Irrational numbers are whose fractional forms have no repeating pattern and do not terminate. And real numbers are all of the number sets that are on the number line. Okay, there's a number line. Now the arrows indicate it goes on, and I don't think we've written this symbol here to positive infinity in that direction and negative infinity in this direction. Absolute value, the distance for 0, there's the sign, and it's always positive. Here's the various symbols and examples of them. Order, anything to the left is less than anything to the right. Anything to the right is greater than anything to the left. And we spent time on fractions and mixed numbers, vocabulary. Remember that a product is the results of multiplying two numbers together. And we want something in its simplest form when the numerator and denominator have no factors in common other than 1. Now, interestingly, 13 is prime, 17 is prime. But that's not always the case. They don't have to be prime numbers there, just that there's no other common factors. Okay, and then reciprocals we've done. The product is always a 1. Multiplying fractions, we try to cancel out if we can, then we multiply the numerators, denominators. In division, we change from division to multiplication by taking the reciprocal of the second term and canceling out wherever we can. Adding fractions, they must have the same denominator, whether we're adding or subtracting. So we have to often, when it's a different denominator, and that's coming up, as we see here, we must get an equivalent fraction whose denominator is 20. We get that by multiplying this fraction by 1, and I'll write it out. But that 1 will be in the form of 4 over 4, so that our new denominator is 20, and we make an equivalent fraction. All right, section 4, we talked about exponential expressions, the base, the exponent, and order of operations. I'm surprised they don't put this down there from time to time. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Okay. And simplify exponential expressions, divide, add and subtract. Again, we do this order of operations from left to right. And if division comes before multiplication, we do the division first. Okay. Well, again, look these over. They give you some examples if you're not sure of vocabulary. There's the word solution is a value for a letter that makes the equation true. Adding and subtracting, again, there are rules. If they're both positive, just add them. If they're both negative, you add them, but then use the negative sign. If it's negative and positive, you subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger. Get 20. Then use the sign of the larger absolute value. And we talked about opposites or the additive inverse and examples. When you have a parenthesis that contains a negative and a negative sign outside, we describe that as the opposite of a negative is a positive. The opposite of a negative is a positive. And we can think of subtraction as the addition of unlike signed numbers or variables. We talked about the quotient of two real numbers. This is one way to write it. This is another way. We talked about multiplying by 0 and dividing by 0. When you multiply anything by 0, it ends up being 0. When you try to divide, it's undefined. And then 0 divided by anything other than 0 is 0. And then the properties of real numbers, addition, the commutative property of addition, commutative property of multiplication, associative property, whether it's addition or multiplication. And then we talked about the multiplicative inverse or reciprocal. Remember, the product is always 1. We talked about the distributive property and the opposite of it, factoring, which we'll use in the next section, next chapter. Identities of addition, adding 0 to anything, it stays the same. Identity of multiplication, multiplying anything by 1 keeps it the same. We use that in equivalent fractions. And then the additive inverse, we've gone over this already. The multiplicative or inverse or reciprocal, the product is always 1. Okay, there are other things too that we're not going to go over. You've had your practice and your quiz bees, and hopefully you're going to be ready for the test.